more folks will trickle in. We have a really dynamic panel that was set up really well by our last panel before lunch. As you exercise your listening voices, I've got an 8-year-old. She talks in the class. They do this, which is quiet coyote. This is quiet coyote. So that's an appropriate metaphor, being in the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy. All right. Shh. Shh. All right. Great. Well, listen, we're jumping into our afternoon program, and we've got a dynamic panel building off what we learned before lunch to talk about what's happening and what are we doing and where are there opportunities to align and get good stuff done down in Southern California. Michael O'Connell is moderating the panel. He is the president and CEO of the Irvine Ranch Conservancy, which is a nonprofit based in Orange County that's charged with helping to manage wildlands around densely populated areas, which is exactly the central topic of our discussion here today. And he'll introduce the panelists. We've got folks from the local, state, and federal level, practitioners, people getting stuff done to help us better understand what's happening and what else can be happening. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Secretary Crowfoot. We really appreciate it. Actually, my opening remarks changed a little bit because of how spectacularly well the first panel did today. Normally, I have to spend about 3/4 of my time talking about the things they talked about, which is the unique fire regimes, and particularly in coastal Southern California, as well as the innovative solutions that are required. But they laid it out perfectly and made our jobs really easy. I also want to thank you for your remarks earlier, because I think one of the things that's transformative about what the task force is doing is recognizing that these problems are solved at the regional level and they're not solved top down. So we're very grateful for that. As we heard this morning, Southern California has a very diverse set of fire regimes, ranging from the montane, I would call a conventional fire problem, which is not enough fire, historical fire suppression, to highly unconventional in our shrublands that have been subject to way too much fire. So it's a very complex landscape. It's a complex landscape of institutions as well, and jurisdictions. You can go to the first slide. Got? How are we doing? All right, there it is. So we've seen this map before, so you can go through it. This is the urban areas and the wildlands. We actually made the urban areas colored instead of gray. And then we have the federal landscape. This is a jurisdictional map. The next one is local jurisdictions, counties. Within this region, there are 7 counties and a very diverse environmental landscape as well. Then, and these are CAL FIRE units as well. Another nuance is that I believe 4, if not 5 of these counties are contract counties to CAL FIRE, so a lot of the work is done by the local fire departments. Next slide, please. And then these are the grantees, the block grantees for the Regional Forest and Fire Capacity Program. I want to mention that for just a second as we're setting this up, because one of the big challenges that we've had at the regional level, and I think every one of the people on this panel could speak to that, is there are a lot of really good strategies, there are a lot of really good ideas, and as we heard, there's a huge amount of implementation money, but there's a gap between those ideas and the development of those projects and programs that will then make them eligible for implementation money. RFFC fills that gap, and it has been a transformative thing for us in Orange County, being able to create the capacity to deliver on those programs. So if you overlay all of those together, I think that's the next slide. It's a mess. And that's what we're working through. And so it's multi-layered. Obviously, things get done at the regional level. We're fortunate in Orange County that we're an actual region. In San Diego, there are, what, 40 fire safe councils, Stan? We have 1 or 2 or 3 in Orange County, and it all operates at a larger scale. So institutionally, it's a very complicated situation as well. But to go back to what we were talking about this morning, based on the knowledge and the science of how fire works, what the problems are, and what the solutions might be, we've taken a look, all of us in our own regions, taken a look and tried to look for points of leverage. How do we solve this problem with the biggest bang for the buck, with the biggest impact for the activities we do? Dr. Keeley talked about cost benefit for things like fuel breaks. We have to look at whether a fuel break is a better strategy than an education program, frankly. We need to look at trade-offs in terms of the solutions we promote. And in doing so, we've come up with essentially a four-pronged strategy that is common among the regional partners. The first one, and I will triple underline this for you, is ignition prevention, particularly along roadways and power lines. There are a lot of projects that are going on. This is something that the data has shown us is you can take any map in Southern California and map the ignitions, and you don't have to map the roads. The ignitions map the roads for you. And so this is a common problem among all of us. Structure and infrastructure resilience, we heard about that this morning as well, but it not only includes new development, it actually, in Orange County, it's a huge problem for retrofitting existing developments. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of homes that are in the Embercast zone that do not meet 7A standards, that some of them still have shake roofs. We have to figure out how to deal with that. Strategic fuel modification, particularly defensible space, but also, as we heard this morning, strategic fuel modification in areas that really will make a difference in how the fire spreads or in suppression activities, and forest health as well. We don't want to forget about our unique sky islands of forest that have a very conventional forest fire problem. And then the last one that I think is common probably throughout the state is capacity and workforce development. That's something that's huge. We can have all the projects we want, and if we don't have people to do them, then we've still got a problem. So thinking about developing workforce capacity as the projects are being developed is a key strategy for us. The most important thing I want to impart to you, and you will hear it from all of the panel members, is that this is too complex a problem to be solved by a single entity. We have to work together. There's just no other way to do it. It's almost unfair to turn to the fire department and say, hey, this is a wildfire problem, you're the fire people, fix it. Because as the fire chief in Orange County likes to say, we're the folks you call after the fire breaks out. We're not the ones that are supposed to prevent the fires. And by the way, those aren't even our roadways. So being able to work together effectively is the fundamental foundation of solving this problem. In Orange County, our regional collaboration platform is something that we call COAST. That's the County of Orange Area Safety Task Force, and it is a group that was convened by the fire chief, but it includes almost 36 agencies, and it's everyone from Southern California Edison to the public landowners, to the Irvine Ranch Water District, to the land managers, to the toll road agency. Everyone is there. We've actually been working since 2015, and we've accomplished a lot, and there's a fact sheet out on our table if you'd like to see that, but it's an example of getting all the entities at the table to discuss these issues. As I mentioned, RFFC has been a tremendous boon in this process because it has filled the gap between all the strategies that we've been able to develop as a collaboration and actually turning them into practical and effective projects and programs on the ground. So that's my way of introduction of this panel. You're going to hear about some actual things. We have the luxury, because of what a fantastic job the morning panel did of laying out both the issues as well as the problems that we've got. We're going to talk about what we're doing in this regard, and just take into consideration that all of this is relatively new. Some of these things have been ongoing for a little while, but most of them are in development right now. So there's a lot of really great ideas and strategies that you'll hear about. So with that, I want to introduce my fellow panelists. First, to my right is Scott Tengenberg, who's the forest supervisor of the Cleveland National Forest. He has 3 separate geographic units of that forest that he has to deal with, and a very, very diverse challenge and problem. Rory Skay is the Chief Deputy Director of the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy and one of our hosts for this meeting. Susie Kirchner is Conservation Programs Manager at the Inland Empire RCD, also one of the RFFC block grantees. And Stan Hill is the Forest and Fire Prevention Project Manager of the RCD of Greater San Diego County. You'll hear RCD a lot because it's actually a really good organizing mechanism for these regional efforts. We don't have an RCD in Orange County, and my organization sort of plays that functional role. So that's why we're the block grantee.
And can we just ask Susie or Stan, just in 3 sentences, to explain what RCD stands for and what it is, just for somebody who might not know?
Yeah, so Resource Conservation District, there are many, resource conservation districts are special districts. There are close to 100 in California, and they include special districts, can be fire protection district, school district, water district. We happen to be conservation districts. And they are a very, very instrumental and valuable tool and avenue for getting funding, for helping to acquire funding and getting that funding directed discreetly to the people that need it, to the places and the people that need it.
Right.
So.
Thank you, Stan. Just the way this is going to work is that each one of these panelists is going to introduce an issue, and then we'll have a little conversation. There'll be examples from other panelists about things that are going on that particular issue in their region. So I'd like to turn it over to Scott to talk about our #1 priority, which is ignition prevention.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Great.
Scott, you want to get your what we heard? We got some feedback early this morning. Folks in the back need everybody to speak right into the microphone.
Okay, very good. So again, to beat the drum a little bit harder, ignition reduction, right? If we don't have a fire, we don't have fire effects, we don't have fire problems, we don't have everything that we've been talking about we don't want to suffer through. So that is the first topic that we'll talk about. Next slide. You saw this map earlier, but it really highlights very well, as Nicole pointed out, the fact that these ignitions, for the most part, are occurring along our roads. But it isn't just our roads. We've got power line sources. We've also got sources from individuals that need our education and enforcement response. Next slide. So what does it look like on those roadsides? You'll hear more about specific efforts, but what it looks like across this broad, diverse, very well-populated, very highly roaded area is something that we estimate to be $1 billion effort. And that's billion with a B, just for roadside response. All of the different methods by which we can reduce the ignitability of our roadsides, we're going to get into some of that here today. But that's what we're really focused on, and we're really thankful for the opportunity to work with not just our state, local, and federal partners, but also our conservation finance possibilities with Blue Forest Conservation and Conservation Investment Management, helping us strategize how to bring private equity funds to bear against this problem as well, leveraging those federal, state, local funds with private investment to reach the sustained and substantial effort that's needed to address this. Next slide. We talked about power lines as well, and we've got significant investments being made by our local utilities, including SDG&E and Southern California Edison, in terms of hardening of those structures. You see steel poles replacing wooden ones, as well as undergrounding of many, many miles of line. On top of that, we've also got those companies investing in covered conductors of that electricity, so that when the wind blows and when things knock against each other, they're not starting new fires and they're not causing our response. Next slide. Finally, there's an education enforcement avenue needed to respond to those individuals who might be creating fires. Yes, roadsides are a thing, but abandoned campfires are still a thing. Smokey Bear was created with a purpose, and this does generate some source of fire in our landscapes. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Susie to share some of our efforts to address these.
Yeah, so we're gonna share throughout this panel a few examples of what we're doing locally on these projects. And so an example I wanted to share is the Cajon Pass Ignition Reduction Project. And for those not familiar, the Cajon Pass is a major transportation corridor between the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains. And besides being the main transportation corridor between the valley and desert communities, there's area also includes a lot of significant infrastructure, including high-powered electrical lines, gas lines, and train and rail infrastructure. So any impacts to this corridor are pretty significant. And ignition sources include a lot of invasive vegetation, and this is a major issue for the region, and it's one of the biggest ignition sources for the nearby San Bernardino Mountains and the San Gabriel Mountains. So the goal of this project is to reduce and slow these ignitions, and it is being approached through a joint effort between the San Bernardino National Forest with support from Caltrans to actually plan CEQA and NEPA side of the project with support from CAL FIRE and County Fire to implement the project. And I think this model has shown, a good setup to be able to do something like this across all the roadsides in the mountains, including 330, 38, Highway 18. And this map here also shows a burn scar that you can see around the pass. And this was from the 2016 Blue Cut fire. And while this certainly wasn't the most recent fire, it was one of the largest and impacted, like over 100 structures were burned. And if you go to the next slide, Forrest, this goes back a little bit to the discussion on the panel this morning, but just showing, what this fire did, to the chaparral ecosystem. You can really see how it looks kind of like a moonscape. So besides doing these fuel reduction projects or these ignition reduction projects for protecting communities and our access point to Vegas, it also has really good implications for protecting the ecosystem and making sure that we're not having too frequent a fire regime in these chaparral habitats.
Thank you. So with the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, we were the beneficiary of early action wildfire prevention funds from the state. Thank you very much, Wade. And one of the projects that we'd been looking at for a long time and were finally able to fund was a combined fuel modification and oak tree resistant tree planting project in the fire corridor. And as you drove down Las Virgenes Road to get here, I mean, that's sort of the route of almost every wind-driven fire. Blowing across the 101 freeway, embers from far away. This particular fire started at the top of the Simi Hills and blew in a lot of different directions. So 10 lanes of concrete freeway are not a fuel break, obviously. So what we're doing is mechanical reduction of the flashy fuels that have sort of invaded some of our parklands that are adjacent to the freeway. And that's what I said. We were using our own properties, Conservancy and Mountains Recreation and Conservation Area properties, so we could jump in right away. And cutting down the weeds, and then immediately planting, I think we're up to 2,000 oaks and some walnuts and toyon in the corridor area. So a big push in our upper Las Virgenes Canyon Open Space Preserve, the more than 5,000 acre property that's north of the freeway that was a state project from the early 2000s. And that's been using crews from the San Gabriel Valley Conservation Corps. We also use Los Angeles Conservation Corps and our own restoration staff. So it's obviously a fairly labor intensive process, but we feel that over time, over several years, we can get established big oak grove areas on these properties that will hopefully be ember screens in future fires where embers fly over. They may not ignite the flashy fuels, but embers could be caught in the oak trees and then fall to the ground. So we're very pleased with the progress. First plants went in fall of 2021, and they're actually growing very, very well. Watering is obviously an issue with the drought, but we have a reclaimed water hydrant from Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, and a lot of hand watering and truck watering that has to go on. So we think it is something that if we could really scale up in a lot of different properties, we could perhaps make a difference. If not an ember reduction, certainly it's enhancing biodiversity, it's creating shaded fuel breaks. So we feel it has a multi-benefit operation.
Great, thank you. And there is, all hands on deck, all options on the table when it comes to ignition reduction. So you heard about some of the biodiversity and some of the reforestation, revegetation options. We're talking about everything from, you know, concrete barriers along highways to herbicide use, to revegetation, to native vegetation, and everything that goes along with that. Are there any other examples that we want to share?
Yeah, Scott, I'd like to mention another one that has a different take on it. It's not as much of an on-the-ground project from an environmental standpoint, and that's that in Orange County, Irvine Ranch Conservancy manages the Orange County Volunteer Fire Watch Network, and it's a group of about 350 volunteers that are trained by the fire authority in understanding how fires operate. They don't fight fires, but they actually are stationed out in high ignition risk areas to deter arson and to report fires quickly. And that's an entirely volunteer-run program, except for one person, a staff person who's here today. Tony Pointer, are you here? Raise your hand. He's not. He's manning his booth out there, I think. But we're able to leverage 350 community volunteers and have a very large role in deterrence and surveillance with a single staff person. So that's been a very successful program as well. And
then I'll also add, with the early action funding, we've also made grants for Arson Watch and additional MRCA Ranger and Fire Division patrols, especially during red flag days, and that actually has borne fruit. We've had, at least on the past 2 4th of Julys, the extra ranger patrols in the night on Mulholland Drive have caught and cited illegal firework folks, teenagers or young adults, namely, that want to start fires. And also a drone program to do nighttime surveys with the FLIR cameras to spot potential heat sources, whether it's a person or a fire, who are illegally in the parklands after hours, and hopefully prevent a homeless encampment fire.
So it truly is all hands on deck. At this point, before we transition to the next strategic issue, I wanted to see if there were any questions from the task force.
I had a question. Susie mentioned NEPA and CEQA clearance on the Cajon Pass project, and just interested from your standpoint as practitioners, we have a federal administration that's really focused on trying to expedite approvals. We have a governor who brings up quite often that he does not want CEQA or environmental regulations to be a barrier to getting this resource protection on the ground. Can you just give a candid assessment of how the environmental review process is going? Does it significantly slow down projects, and would you make any recommendations?
So I can't say I'm the exact person to ask for the Cajon Pass project, but I do think, from what I know, that the processes haven't been completely coinciding with one being able to be accomplished a lot sooner, and implementation kind of having to hop, you know, from federal land to the non-ready private land. So I think there could be a little more coordination there for that particular project, but I don't know the full details to assess.
I would say that the Cutting Green Tape program that the state has initiated has made a lot of big steps forward by consolidating things into a system rather than having to go to each individual agency and get clearance and then go back to another agency to fix what the other agency did. Cutting Green Tape has been helpful. That's
really encouraging, and just the Cutting Green Tape is a cute way to say reducing the bureaucracy for projects like this that are all about protecting the environment.
Right.
And I can tease the name because it's our state's program.
Yeah.
But I would say for the folks in the audience, either here at the ranch or online, in terms of feedback from this meeting, if you're a practitioner and you're feeling stymied by either the lack of coordination between federal and state, the EIR, EIS process, or you have suggestions around how to get the projects done more quickly, like the ones you're talking about, ignition reduction, we want to hear that.
Great, thank you. With that, we'll move on to the second strategic issue, which is structure and infrastructure resilience. I'm actually going to be introducing this issue. This is an enormous issue, as I talked about in my overview, not only for new development, but in particular in a lot of the wildland-urban interface for retrofitting existing homes. The issue is typified by a little anecdote I'll show you in this slide. This is the aftermath of the Coast Fire, which occurred in Orange County last year. And it was not a particularly unusual fire. It was not a catastrophic fire. It was actually driven by onshore winds, not offshore winds. It was not an unusual fire. The strategic fuel modification around that community had been inspected that week by Orange County Fire Authority and found to be completely up to standard. And 20 of 22 homes on that ridge burned. And they all burned from the attic down. And the reason was they were not hardened against embers, period. And what that illustrated for us was that you have to do all of these things. You can't just prevent ignitions because you're not going to prevent every ignition, first off. You can't just do strategic fuel modification because embers will go right over it. You have to have structures that are resilient. So this, in a nutshell, that's the problem we're dealing with. Why are we having structures that are still burning? You've all seen the pictures that have come out of various fires where the community is completely burned to the ground and the vegetation around it, the trees around it are still standing. That's all about home hardening. And so what we're doing as an example, just to kick this off, in Orange County, we're using the RFFC money to try to get an idea of why this is happening. We're going to do a region-wide poll and some focus groups of homeowners to find out what is missing. Is it a lack of understanding? Is it a lack of tools? Is it a lack of resources? Is it a funding problem? In the example on the previous slide, those homes were worth several $1 million apiece. I don't think it was a money problem. It was probably an awareness problem. However, there are programs that exist, and a good example of that is what the Orange County Fire Authority has, their Ready, Set, Go program. They have a website that has all the tools that any homeowner would need, and the reason I know that is because I've used them myself in order to make my home harden against wildfire. You can even fill out a questionnaire, and it will spit out not only the things you need to do, but a shopping list for you if you want to go do it yourself. Something is missing, however, since we have so many homes that are not hardened against wildfire. So this is an issue that has to be addressed. It's probably common statewide, and there are a lot of programs that we're doing in the region to try and deal with that. So you'll hear a few more in a minute.
Guess that's me. So one of the things, so this slide here, just like it shows right there. So one of the unique things about the Resource Conservation District of Greater San Diego County is we are also the Fire Safe Council of San Diego County. Within the countywide Fire Safe Council, as this map shows, every color on that map is its own individual Fire Safe Council. So we have over 40 right now, and I cannot do this at all without giving a shout out to our Fire Safe Council person, Morgan Graves, who's here in the audience somewhere, and she's been manning our table. This is her thing. She is all things Fire Safe Council in San Diego County. However, so what the umbrella Fire Safe Council does is we provide management and support to, like I said, over 40 community Fire Safe Councils. One of the things that falls under that is we have a no-cost defensible space program that's available to homeowners, meet a certain criteria. That service is available free of charge to the homeowner, and we'll have a contractor come out there, clear and chip. You get to keep the chips. There's also kind of a sister program to that. It's just a free chipping. So if you can do the brush yourself, we'll come make the chips. Again, you get to keep the chips. It was mentioned, like Mike was just talking about, education, why is this information not getting to the people that need it? So the Fire Safe Council also oversees and distributes a couple of workshops. So one of the ones we do is a community wildfire prevention plan writers workshop. We do those for tribes and other people, help people get their CWPPs put together, approved, like walk you through the whole process, make it easy for people. We have a wildfire urban interface workshop that's really kind of the gist of that one is just to give community members a general understanding of where they sit in that transition zone, right, between the wildlands and the urban lands, that thing that we call WUI that we're so fond of, just to help people get a better understanding of what their situation really is. Another one that that kind of, you know, now that you know what WUI is and you've done everything you can, but when that ignition happens, that we can't catch everyone, and the wildfire does come to your door, we have another workshop that's called Last Chance Survival Simulation Workshop. That's like, what do you do when it's knocking at your door? So those are some of the things that we're doing in San Diego as far as the Fire Safe Council and just really trying to help people become educated and aware.
Thank you, Stan. We have a couple other examples, I think, as well. Rory, did you want to talk about the community hardening effort in the zone?
Sure, and both the Resource Conservation District of the Santa Monica Mountains also has a very active homeowner education and home evaluation program. The Ventura County Regional Fire Safe Council is also doing that in Ventura County and Thousand Oaks and Simi, Moore Park, those communities. And it is, as Dan said, it's really a great way to educate individuals, homeowners, what they can do and what they need to be aware of as far as wildfire risk. And then another thing, it's not exactly home hardening, but we did give a small grant to a small city that's adjacent to our Upper Las Virgenes Canyon Open Space Preserve property. They came to us and asked if we would fund undergrounding at least 3 of their Edison power poles. They're right on the border of the park, and it made a lot of sense because there had been a power pole fire just a few months before the Woolsey fire that they managed to get a hold of. So clearly Edison and PG&E and the other utilities have a big role to play, but at least on small areas, we may be able to assist with undergrounding problem power poles.
One of the things that's clear about this issue is there's probably nothing more local than retrofitting a single structure or dealing with a neighborhood or a homeowners association. So that creates this wicked problem, another wicked problem, which is what role does the state have in it? And I don't have an answer for that, but that's something we're working on in our regions and trying to figure out the best way for the state to support these local efforts.
Yeah, I have a question, and I would just bring us back to what Daniel Berlant, who's the acting fire marshal, said this morning, that CAL FIRE and our Office of Emergency Services is working on this Joint Powers Authority to try to bring in FEMA monies to support home hardening. But Michael, a point you made, really resonated with me, which is for some, it's a resource issue because some of these retrofits cost money that people don't have. But for a lot of folks, including a lot of people in the WUI, these are expensive homes, fairly affluent people. And I wanted to turn to Joe, Chief Tyler, who leads CAL FIRE, and just for a bit of a reality check, I mean, how prevalent are hardened homes hardening of existing homes in Southern California? Do we, are we almost there? Do we have a long way to go? Are we somewhere in between?
I think that that Daniel hit on this really clearly earlier. When we start looking at brand new construction, there are efforts being made. But when we look at current construction, there are a relatively small number of homes that have been retrofitted. So options, when we have limited resources or funding to do that, are this JPA and the Community Wildfire Preparedness and Mitigation Program under the Office of State Fire Marshal has low-cost retrofits available on their website, available to the communities to start making those efforts to harden their homes.
I couldn't agree more strongly with Chief Tyler, and in fact, it's something that has to be done and organized at the community level. So just because it's my own personal experience, so it cost me about $1,500 to retrofit my home, to put screens over vents, to box the eaves, things like that, but I'm a handy person, I did it myself. My 88-year-old next door neighbor doesn't have the knowledge, the awareness, the money, and she has a paperbark eucalyptus leaning up against her shake roof. And so when my friend came over from the fire authority just to say, did you do a good job or not? He said, your house is not gonna burn itself down, her house is gonna burn your house down. And so we've got to look at this at the community level, and I agree with Chief Tyler, we've got to have mechanisms to support that scale of effort. It's like retrofitting for earthquakes. We did it for earthquakes. And it's going to be cheaper, I think, for fire retrofitting.
Yeah, and it just seems like there's this disconnect because I guarantee you almost every California resident understands the severity of wildfire. And most of us are pretty frightened about it, but there's a disconnect because then you ask that, what is it, 25% of Californians that live in these wildland urban interface or the high hazard zones, and a small portion actually have taken action to harden their homes.
That's correct. Yeah. We want to find out why that is and create programs and projects to fix that. Fantastic, thank you. So we're going to move on to our third strategy in our package, and remember, these do not operate independently. They all have to be done. If you just do one, you're still going to lose everything. And that is strategic fuel modification, and we're also going to add a little discussion of forest conservation in it as well, because we've mostly been focusing on these shrublands and wind-driven fires, which is where most of the habitat is and most of the people live in Southern California. But forest conservation is still very important, so I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Yes, thank you. So like you heard this morning, there's a lot of different things that need to come to bear, and fuel modification is one of those things. You can see in this slide an example of a fire that started, again, right next to somebody's property and burned up the slope. But the reason it was able to be caught, the reason it was able to be one of those small fires, not one of those massive catastrophic fires, was because of the fuel break that was at top. The idea that a bit of vegetation modification can help both with the ability to get firefighters in there, ability to get retardant down, and the ability to respond is really what this is focused on. And so as a key piece of conserving all of that wildland that you see adjacent to that fire is, again, those strategic fuel breaks, not fuel breaks on every ridge, not fuel breaks behind every home. We're talking about places where defensible actions can be taken to support that fuel break and actually keep those fuel-driven fires, topography-driven fires, from being as catastrophic as they otherwise might be. Next slide. So where has this been put to the test? Multiple places, not just in that slide that was just seen, but also in this one as well. And the list of fires that you can see here. The slide, the photo is of the Cranston fire. And what you see in the foreground, taken from the helicopter, is the chaparral covered slope leading up to the CAL FIRE and Forest Service created fuel break adjacent to the community of Idlewild. If not for that fuel break, it's very possible most of Idlewild would have been consumed in the Cranston fire. And so again, key piece of our both suppression and forest conservation efforts is that strategic fuel break network, getting them in place, but then also maintaining them. We're not talking about something, we're not talking about a levee that you could just build and then it's there for 100 years. We're talking about the kind of thing that needs continual upkeep. And so it's very possible that in those previous instances where we've measured the lack of effectiveness in a fuel break, it may not have been a maintained fuel break. And so this is another key point for us to focus on. Next slide. The efforts continue into forest conservation, and you heard Dr. Molinari talk about our efforts to conserve our sky islands, our montane forests. Here, that's more of the traditional thinning and understory burning that you've heard about across the state and needing to be implemented all over where there are forested landscapes. But here, critically important because, yes, Southern California has some forests, but we are losing them at a rate faster than anywhere else in the entire state. And if we don't take action, if we don't protect them from getting hit by those ignitions, and once they do, being not subject to catastrophic outcomes when they're hit by those ignitions, we're going to lose those precious bits of biodiversity. We have some examples of both of these in progress, and I'll turn it over to Susie to share one of those.
Yes, so one effort that we've been working on in our region is called the Santa Ana Landscape Restoration Strategy. And this effort was first identified as a project by the San Bernardino National Forest, but became more of a collaborative effort between partners in the San Bernardino Mountains, some of which are shown up here, after recognizing that the Santa Ana River watershed is one of the largest and most intact watersheds in Southern California. There's a really critical need to protect it. both for the ecosystem and the ecological services it provides, but also to ensure that the function of the watershed exists for the 6 million people that live there. So part of this effort has been the development of the San Bernardino Mountains Headwaters Resiliency Partnership. And this is, again, a group of partners that have come together to work together on this project for the planning, prioritization, implementation, by bringing together staff resources, technical knowledge, and funding resources to put more funding into this effort than maybe could have been done by the Forest Service alone. So the strategy here is pivoting more from kind of these discrete projects throughout the forest to actually planning at a really large scale, and setting up a pipeline of projects for the next 5 to 10 years for restoration work here in the Santa Ana watershed in the mountains up there. And linking back a bit to Scott's last slide, the work here is really going to be anchored in that Southern California montane strategy, using a lot of the science that's coming out of that. And then the last thing I wanted to mention is just that the RFFC program and other funding investments like that have been really critical in allowing the planning to actually occur at a scale this big, and bringing those resources to be able to do that. And so far, we've already been able to acquire LiDAR for this whole area and process it into products for the planning, as well as doing a lot of the on-the-ground survey work, and more is to come with the list of partners here.
We've got another example to highlight in San Diego County, right, Stan?
We do. As you see on the slide here, this is a view of a project, CAL FIRE Forest Health project that we have going on Palomar Mountain, the title of which is Saving San Diego's Last Mixed Conifer Forest. And I was reminded this morning to put the second part of that title because we lost one of the other ones in the Cedar Fire, Cuyamaca State Park, the Three Sisters Peaks in Cuyamaca State Park. So this particular project, if you see the little blobs of color there, if you work from the left side of the slide, this project involves the Palma Indian Reservation, the United States Forest Service Cleveland National Forest. Then you get onto some private land, the Palomar Land and Cattle Company owned by the Bergman family. And then the kind of pink stuff there, yeah, where Scott's doing his cursor, that is Caltech, Palomar Observatory. And then there's another little piece down lower called Jeff Valley. So this is one of, Palomar Mountain is one of the Sky Islands that is part of the montane strategy overview that Scott highlighted. We're currently about 50% of the way through this the whole project is 1,500 acres, and we're currently about halfway through, and we're in the process of putting an application together to do a phase 2 and continue this work, this project, as well as others. But and I don't know if was there a slide of nope, I don't think there was a slide of the best place up there. So anyway, next.
Thanks, Dan. So any questions from the task force?
Well, quick question. On the slide that Susie provided on the project on their Sky Island, I saw a logo of a water agency. And to me, water agencies are really important potential partners given the protection of the watersheds. But historically, I don't think I'm being unfair, that water agencies, broadly speaking, across the state haven't come to the table on projects like this. So are you seeing that in Southern California? And what can we do to engage water agencies more?
Well, I was just going to quickly mention for our region, the San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District came to the table, and I think, again, because of the importance of the watershed to their needs, in that map, I did show a few of just the infrastructure that belongs to the water district or water that is, a direct result of what occurs up in the watershed. So they do have a vested interest in protecting these resources, but we've talked about trying to bring in some of the other agencies, the more local agencies, to also engage in that effort.
I would take the opportunity to highlight the kind of long-term engagement by the Santa Ana Watershed Protection Agency. They've been involved with both the San Bernardino National Forest and the Cleveland National Forest, and recognizing just what you said, Director Crowfoot, of how this is an important thing for all of Southern California. These are the sources of their water, and if they want to actually have good, clean water and good, steady water supply, it pays for them to invest in that watershed protection.
The Las Virgenes Municipal Water District, their headquarters are just up the road, and they almost lost their facility in the Woolsey fire. So fire and fire protection and cooperation is definitely top of mind for them. And also, and you might note that Angeles National Forest was the first forest created for the being watershed for Los Angeles.
We're also getting a lot of participation from Irvine Ranch Water District in our efforts as well, for the same exact reasons that they identify. So I think it depends on the individual water district. So we're going to move on to the last one, the last of our four. And this is, I would say, probably the least developed for one particular reason. This is workforce development, and that is that there hasn't been a lot of money to do a lot of projects for a while. And so there hasn't been the need for this kind of capacity. We're in a fantastic place right now where we have the chance to do something at a much larger scale. And so the issue of workforce and workforce development has emerged very quickly as very important, but it's not quite as mature in terms of being addressed with specific projects. Stan, you want to give a quick overview, and then I guess we have a couple of examples.
Sure. So, yeah, just like Mike said, you know, the workforce piece, every single project that we've highlighted, you know, a lot of the work that the folks earlier today highlighted, like anywhere you go, whenever you hear of any project, many of you know it takes people, it takes labor to make that actually happen, right? And we have a workforce in Sacramento that's doing wonderful work to get this funding, and in Vallejo to get this funding down to the ground. But once it gets to the ground, we need people, we need boots on the ground, right? Just like when you're putting out a fire, same thing, it takes work. So in Southern California, not uncommon to the rest of the state, but as you know, the cost of living is somewhere else. Yeah, wherever that is, you pick. So, you know, one of the real challenges here is the difficulty is finding people, paying them, training them, keeping them. You know, if you look at graphs of like the number of people that are out there looking for jobs, the unemployment rate, like where are all these people? So, you know, we have a number of us have, and there's some folks out in the tent with tables that have programs. So I'll just highlight two local ones that we have in San Diego County that are, you know, we're trying, right? So they just so happens that they both involve tribes. So one of the collaborations we have is something that's called the Native American Conservation Corps. And that particular program is a collaboration with California State Parks, Climate Science Alliance, San Diego River Conservancy, Canyonlands organization. And what that one is, what we do with the NACC is we try to recruit local tribal youth. We give them basic fire training, and then we provide on-the-job training in forestry practices and traditional ecological knowledge. And most of the work that they do is in Cuyamaca State Park, because it's California State Parks part of that. We ran one session of that last year, and we just started. They're actually getting their training this week for the second session of that particular program. Another one we have, collaboration, is the Indigenous Fire Stewardship Pathways Program, and that's a collaboration with Climate Science Alliance, the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, and there's also a kind of a group called the Southern California Interagency Training Cadre, which the many folks from the Cleveland National Forest are part of, and kind of doing the same thing there. Get a group of people together, give them some basic fire training infused with quite a bit of traditional ecological knowledge, and then let them go, you know, some of them find jobs in different places, but the idea is to expose people to this work and to let people know that, you know, when we keep talking about this increasing pace and scale, most of us in this room know what that means. That means we need more people. So the idea that a person that lives, you know, in the WUI or even farther out and wants to stay there and try to earn a living there, it's possible. You don't have to go to the city to get a job. You can do it in your own backyard, in the place that you grew up, in the place that you love, in your community, and protect those resources that are surrounding you. So you don't have to go to the concrete to do that. You can stay home and do that. So that's a couple of examples.
Yeah, and one of the projects I wanted to highlight from our region is the Southern California Mountain Foundation's Urban Conservation Crew, or their core, and similar to what Stan just shared, they work with young adults aged 18 to 25 in the area. So these are local, oftentimes underserved community members, and they work with them to experience trainings and get on the ground experience on conservation projects. And we've been working with their core through the RFFC program. This photo here shows a basic 32 training that the Watershed Research Training Center came out and put on for us last September. And in addition to this, they're working with the Forest Service to actually be able to work on some of these NEPA-ready projects. Some of it's brush clearing along roadsides, things that are accessible for hand crews. But I think the greatest thing that the Mountains Foundation does is really make sure to connect these core members with these long-term roles with the Forest Service, with CAL FIRE, and investing in those local community members who are rooted there, maybe aren't as interested in moving around the state and really want to be there and be that workforce for the San Bernardino Mountains. So a great group, and they have a table out here if you want to check them out and talk with their core members.
So we've given out a number of grants for workforce development projects to Northeast Trees, which is an urban nonprofit, and one of the field trips tomorrow will be highlighting their work. Help create a tribal conservation corps, grants to two tribes. Outward Bound Adventures, Community Nature Connection also does a lot of training to help their inductees learn about native plants, so that, for instance, on that 101 corridor project, we needed to have people knowledgeable enough not to mow down the native grasses that are there, or milkweed. So identifying that. Obviously, California Conservation Corps, a real shout out to Bruce Saito and his great crew members. Los Angeles Conservation Corps. And then we've also helped fund an additional seasonal fire crew with our own Mountains Recreation Conservation Authority Fire Division. But any of the wildfire projects can incorporate workforce development, but we're really bent on ensuring that these workforce development grants end in skills, knowledge, and abilities that make applicants ready for long-term careers in the natural resources field. So if we could help create a model for public agencies to ensure that they are creating internal career pathways. We've been working with Esther Feldman Consulting and with OBA, Outward Bound Adventures, for creating a community college certificate program, and that's underway with LA Community College District right now. In fact, and I also mentioned, I know you've met the MRCA's Chief Ranger, Fernando Gomez. He was one of our success stories. We've, over the years, have hired through all kinds of our Build Youth and other Build Bridges to Park Careers programs, folks that we've been able to bring up through the pipeline and have achieved great success.
Yes.
Rory, I'm so glad you brought up pathways for permanent jobs, because these training programs through the Corps, the State Conservation Corps, which we're so proud to be part of, but also the local corps are so important. But building those pathways so those young people that come out of the programs have those jobs. So I wanted to put Joe and Jen on the spot, because you're a major employer of these crews that are doing the work. What are you doing to ensure that, once these young people come out of these programs, they're actually, ready and can be hired into your workforce?
I appreciate the question. And, I want to start by thanking our CCC partners from the Camarillo Center who are here today helping facilitate the logistics of this event. Not only are they doing that, but they are also responding to emergencies throughout the year. And we have built here at CAL FIRE a great relationship with our California Conservation Corps partners to build and expand fire crews, hand crews across the state to both do resilience work as well as emergency response. What we found was that sometimes we are our own impediments to success and moving forward and providing pathways and opportunities. So we really took a hardcore look at how do we create a pathway, not only for California Conservation Corps, but formerly paroled participants, and our military veterans on how to create that pathway into permanent state civil service. And so part of that was evaluating our training standards and bringing our training standards to not lower, but to the level that is consistent of the training that they are receiving in their programs that they are currently part of, to be able to cross over in that pathway and move forward. That has allowed us to hire almost, I think our last count when we did that estimate was over 500 California Conservation Corps members and 103 participants of our Ventura Training Center program into CAL FIRE's Civil Service program.
That's terrific. So again, Joe, thanks so much, because I think we're doing very similar things. We're certainly looking, again, at what's the qualifications just to even get into the door in terms of federal service, re-looking at all of that, making sure that we're staying contemporary with where our newer people coming into our organization, and certainly with the CCCs and other types of training opportunities that we have. We've been successful in many ways, just last week or so, doing direct hire programs. We had offered over 400 or 500 jobs into our fire organization, and certainly looking at increasing our non-fire opportunities as well. So we have our biologists, our archaeologists, all of those other types of resources that we need to have, and looking to increase that, and certainly working with the CCCs and other educators to be able to get those pathways into it. So definitely a great source of wonderful, passionate, highly qualified, dedicated people. So come see me if any of you are interested.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. We're making progress, and we need to, because we need workforce that reflects California. And just to keep it 100% real, if you look at this panel, we are not a set of panels that reflects California. So we need to create pathways for all of our residents and all talented people, no matter what their zip code, race or ethnicity, gender, to actually do this leadership work. And if they're not getting in the front door, they're definitely not moving up the ranks to leadership. So that's another important reason to do it.
Absolutely.
Wade, I'm sorry about that. Wade, as well, a comment Jen just made, another pathway to consider that I would encourage people to go to is Governor Newsom and the First Partner have found really important as a priority a program called Cal Volunteers. So if you take an opportunity or have an opportunity to go to the Cal Volunteers website, they are another pathway for opportunities across public service.
Yeah, 90-second PSA. California College Corps is recruiting, beginning this week, college students that can get a $10,000 stipend to offset the cost of their tuition or their expenses by doing service within a community-based organization, including climate work. 3,000 positions. This is a bigger program than the Peace Corps federally. And that's a program that the governor and Cal Volunteers launched just last year. And those folks are going to be great applicants for these jobs as well.
Fantastic. That was worth the PSA.
Potentially one last question, Michael.
Sure. Yes.
So as a segue to the next panel, which is all about funding, you guys in Southern California are now getting hundreds of millions of dollars from CAL FIRE, from RFSC, from the Forest Service. How are you evaluating success of that money, what's working and not working? If this were a legislative budget hearing, which we may have, in a month or two, what would you say about the money that's flowing in, and what's your message for the next panel about where money is needed? Is it more competitive grants? Is it block grants? It's for certain things. What's your message on funding?
So I'll start off, and that is that traditionally the funding pathway for work on the ground has been project by project by project, and it hasn't worked, which is why we're sitting here. And I think what is transformative about the way this process is working is that you have regional collaborations that are coming up with regional action plans, and I believe that is those plans that need to be funded. They need to be funded through block grants that the plan is accountable to. It's not just writing a check and saying, have fun with the money. As long as that money is being used to implement that plan, we've heard over and over and over again in this panel about how all of the actions are local in nature. And so it doesn't make any sense to have a state administered program out of Sacramento that's project by project where they're picking the projects. We need to pick the projects. but we need to pick them consistent with a very strong action plan that is supported regionally. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Mike's saying there. And, you know, when I think about our CAL FIRE Forest Health Program project, for example, you know, it's a strategic footprint that was picked. And now, you know, when you look at that particular footprint, it's like, okay, that project protects the mountain from something happening from a certain direction, let's say. So we need to build on that, you know, like just, okay, we focused on a piece this big, but, you know, if you zoom way out and get up to 30,000 feet, that's like this little dot. So we need to zoom out to 30,000 feet and really start looking at what we're doing and connecting things together so that we are protecting more, right? And, you know, this work, if you think about, you know, it's prevention, right? It's like insurance. We hope that it never has to do its thing. We hope that Scott's strategic fuel breaks never have to be used, but we know the reality, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's same with the ignition reduction strategy, right? Let's hope it works, but.
That's a great point. I mean, if we don't have another catastrophic fire in 30 years, we'll have done our job, but it's going to be hard to be very specific about why that occurred. It's hard to prove a negative like that, right? So we are running a little bit over, although we did start 10 minutes late. So I actually, if I give my 2-minute wrap up, because I want to put a bookend on this, then we will be exactly 10 minutes behind and we'll have done our hour. So just want you to know, we rehearsed this very carefully. I want to make a couple of key points for you to take away from this. Number one is we talked about ignition prevention over and over and over again, and take that away. But I also want to tell you there's some good news in that, which is we don't have to prevent every single ignition. We have to prevent ignitions that will cause catastrophic fires. In Southern California, 90% of our damage is done in 10% of the fires. Let me say that again, 90% of the damage, 10% of the fires. If we prevent those 10% of the ignitions, the fire agencies are extremely well resourced to keep non-wind driven fires to a very small size. So that is a key thing to remember. We've got to focus on wind events and ignitions during wind events. Those are only in Orange County 18 to 24 days a year. I'll take 50 ignitions a year that occur outside of that window. Another thing that's important, every single one of the projects that you heard reflects a very, very high level of collaboration and cooperation among local, state, federal agencies, tribes, land managers, private sector. That's going to be critical in order for us to be successful. We can't do it without everyone at the table and pulling in the same direction, which is why these regional action plans are so important. Another thing that's important is we need to do all these things for it to work. We can't just do ignition prevention and think we're going to have solved the problem, because we can't stop every ignition. We can't just harden homes and think we're going to have the problem solved, because if we don't stop fire, then we're going to lose biodiversity and our precious habitats are going to be converted. We can't just do fuel breaks and think that they are going to hold. It's all of those things together. This is an integrated strategy. And then the last thing I'll say is, I think this day has shown that we are on the right path. Keep going. Let's just do this, because I think for the first time in the state, we're getting it right, and we just need to do it bigger and faster and better.
Well, that works as an end note for me. Thank you all. Let's give the panel a round of applause. Excellent, excellent discussion. Sarah